The discourse on reparation and repatriation must include conversations with Africa. These conversations are critical to the development of Africans across the globe, to the repositioning of Black people, and to a redefinition of race within a global context of equality and equity. The National Council on Reparation, formerly the National Commission on Reparation, was established by the government of Jamaica in 2009 to recommend the form or forms which reparation may take and to receive testimonies from the public and from experts with the aim of guiding a national approach to reparatory justice. The Council, housed in the Ministry of Gender, Entertainment and Sport, under the guidance of the Honorable Olivia Grange, has been continuing the legacy. Discourses with Africa, with a focus on forging tangible links for future engagements between Jamaicans, Caribbean peoples, the African diaspora, and our motherland, Africa. The National Council commenced this discourse years ago. Most recent engagements include discussions with the Jamaican ambassador to Ghana, His Excellency Napoleon Abdullahi, on opportunities for engagement with Ghana, especially for our youth. A webinar in commemoration of World Day for African and Afro-Descendant Culture under the theme People of African Descent, Defamation, Race Relations, and Development Institutions. Conversations with the African National Congress Women's League under the theme Resistance, Resilience, and Recognition with the President of the Women's League and the Young Convener. 2019 was the year of return, and members of the National Council went to Ghana to participate in these events. In August 2018, the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union, Ambassador His Excellency Thomas Kwesi Kwartey, concluded a series of visits to the Caribbean, which included stops in Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Jamaica. In June 2020, the Honorable Olivia Grange announced a renewed thrust to continue island-wide consultations towards the framing of a national policy on reparatory justice for Jamaicans. She noted that the result of the consultations will be a robust policy of intergenerational scope to guide this and successive governments on the path to reparatory justice. Reparation is a discussion that must be seen within a framework that demands continuous engagements. It's an intergenerational approach. We today are speaking for those generations yet unborn. The same concept that drove our ancestors to relentless fights against injustice. We represent the voices of those to come. Negotiations about reparation is not about the release of obligations by the payment of funds or technological transfers. It's more than that. It's a recognition that there is really no valuation on the suffering, the continued defamation, and systemic systems that govern how Black people are profiled and treated globally. This conversation today is one among many. For until we all, as Black people, embrace the fact that the enslavement of Africans was a crime against humanity, a crime against us, that crimes are punishable, and that compensation forms part of the discourse, until we recognize that we owe it to our ancestors, to ourselves, to the present and future generations, to stand up and be a part of the articulation of these rights, we will be talking for a very long time. The National Council on Reparations is a sounding board for all Jamaicans. The Caribbean Reparation Commission is a sounding board for all Caribbean peoples, wherever we are located. I use this platform to encourage you to take us to task, to become part of the momentum, not as spectators, but as participants. I am positive that this event will jolt us to action. Let us start somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Lalita, for that succinct and excellent overview of the National Council on Reparations. And now we continue with Africa in all her radiance, beauty, and intellect. synthesized and manifest in the persona of the Vice Chair of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, Director of the Center for Reparation Research, former Chair of the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, Professor Emerita at the University of the West Indies, etc., etc. Professor Vereen Shepherd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cordell Green, for your introduction, and greetings to fellow speakers and our online audience as we continue to observe Africa Day and our conversation with Africa, and as we recall that 1 year ago to this day, on May 25, 2020, George Floyd was murdered, globalizing the Black Lives Matter movement and drawing us all in an important conversation about justice, equality, and non-discrimination. For those just joining us, I say Happy Africa Day, even as we know that we are conscious that two pandemics are marching side by side and disrupting our world: COVID-19 and racism. A reminder that just a year after its independence, Ghana, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, convened the first Conference of Independent African States on 15th April 1958. The conference was an unequivocal assertion of Africa's rejection of colonial and imperialist domination of the continent. It became the first Pan-African conference to be held on the continent, bringing together various African countries. To further encourage and forge a common goal of fighting against colonial rule, the conference called for the observance of African Freedom Day once a year, to mark the onward progress of the liberation movement and to symbolize the determination of the people of Africa to free themselves from foreign domination and exploitation. Consequently, 15th April was enacted as African Freedom Day or Africa Liberation Day, and this marked the beginning of what would later be known as Africa Day, and proceeded to form, of course, the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, and the AU, to solidify continental relationships and common struggles. Before that, in the nearly half century between 1900 and 1945, various political leaders and intellectuals from Europe, North America, and Africa met 6 times, but outside of Africa, to discuss colonial control of Africa and develop strategies for eventual African political liberation. In 1900, for example, Trinidadian Henry Sylvester Williams organized the first Pan-African meeting in collaboration with several Black leaders representing various countries of the African diaspora. The Pan-African Congresses helped to increase international awareness of racism and colonialism in the tradition of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and laid the foundation for the political independence of African nations. African leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria, and Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya were among several attendees of congresses who subsequently led their countries to political independence. The influence of these men helped galvanize the formation of the OAU. The founding of the OAU then is referred to today as Africa Day. So again, Happy Africa Day. I'm so honored to have been asked to participate in this year's Africa Day events. I was born in Africa, but Africa St. Mary, Jamaica, on a former plantation owned by the enslaving Hibbard family in the UK, but which became a post-slavery land settlement for the peasantry. and my father was able to buy 5 acres of land on that former plantation that became a land settlement. It was not officially named Africa, of course. The district was Hopewell, but the colonial miseducation and missionary propaganda about that other side of the ocean caused people to call it Africa. Today, I am even prouder to have been born in Africa, as DNA results indicate that my ancestors on my mother's side were abducted from among the Tikar people in the country now called Cameroon, that my great-great-grandfather Alexander Mighty was born into slavery and freed in 1834 with nothing but freedom, while enslavers like the Hibberts were unjustly rewarded financially. Because that history has given me the energy to be an integral part of the repatriatory justice movement. So by any definition, I am an African. Being part of all these people, and in the knowledge that none dare contest that assertion, I, like Thabo Mbeki, shall claim that I am an African. Slavery, like that practiced by the Hibberts, was one of those historical tragedies suffered by both South Africa and Jamaica. Like other historical tragedies, it was rooted in the ideology of white supremacy and racial discrimination, which is why I have titled my paper, Learning from Historical Tragedies to Combat Racial Discrimination Today. Many of us here are familiar with the major historical tragedies or inhumane actions that have affected global history and which were related to racial or ethnic hierarchizing and discrimination, including conquest, colonization, genocide against indigenous and minority populations, the African Ma'afa or Maangamizi, wars to suppress enslaved-led protests, anti-colonial post-slavery protests and independence movements, acts of ethnic cleansing, racial apartheid, the brutal suppression of more modern civil rights and labor movements, land appropriation and underdevelopment, 20th century wars of expansion to empower some nations at the expense of others, and the list goes on. The latest tragedy is COVID-19, which has created vaccine imperialism, unmasked racism where it was covert, disproportionately affecting indigenous peoples, people of African descent, and generally those in post-colonial societies left in a situation of underdevelopment by those who enrich themselves, then ran away from the consequences. There was untold suffering as a result of these tragedies and inhumane acts, including murder, torture, public flogging, imprisonment, and general humiliation. And the descendants of those whose ancestors suffered, for example, from the African Ma'afa, have tried to find ways to memorialize their ancestors and seek redress for such tragedies, including through reparation. We need to learn from historical tragedies to combat racial discrimination today. So I applaud all of you assembled here today for showing by your presence that you share a common concern for the creation of a world in which racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance play no part either in our personal lives or in our international relations. Regrettably, we still live in a world where ethnicity, socially constructed race, the tyranny of the pigmentocracy, gender, religious beliefs, cultural practices, sexual orientation, and other differences act as barriers to harmony. And the group that suffers most from racism and racial discrimination are Africans and people of African descent, which is why the United Nations Program of Activities for the International Decade for People of African Descent, 2050 to 2024, is so critical. It offers us diverse strategies for righting the wrongs of the past so that we can build a more peaceful world. But halfway into the decade, we continue to be confronted with evidence that we are still some way from realizing that goal of universal peace, inter-ethnic harmony, and unbiased justice that so many have worked to achieve, indeed shed their blood to attain. We see the evidence today in the Hands in the Air because Black Lives Matter campaign that transformed itself from a local to a global movement in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. In the racial taunts directed at black players at football games, where on occasion macaco or monkey is shouted from the stands with complete disregard for the feelings of black players, in institutional and structural racism, in racial profiling at international borders and within some countries, in messages and ideas based on racism, racial superiority, or hatred that incite racism, in targeted police stop and frisk or search, in biased employment practices, in differentiated access to justice, political power, housing, health care, and quality education, in disproportionate incarceration rates by ethnic groups, in biased textual and visual representations, cartoons, and journalistic pieces that disrespect others' religion and ethnicity, in everyday speech and attitudes that reflect xenophobia and bigotry, in cultural practices that humiliate particular ethnic groups, in the iconic symbols placed in some places that remind formerly oppressed populations of the perpetrators of the tragedies of the past, and in so many more areas. Today, our mission must be to join with the international community in the global call for concrete action for the total elimination of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and the comprehensive implementation of and follow-up to the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, the DDPA. Indeed, the DDPA, adopted at the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance in Durban in 2001, underlines the fact that promoting greater respect and trust among different groups within society must be a shared but differentiated responsibility of government institutions, political leaders, grassroots organizations, and just citizens. It is for these victims of historical tragedies like the Haitian Revolution, the Morant Bay War, in which hundreds of men and women were executed, and the 1960 Sharpeville Massacre in South Africa, that the Caribbean, as the sixth region, urges our family on the continent to overturn the uncertainties of Durban 2001, when bilateralism was chosen over Pan-Africanism in the reparation struggle, to join us now. And those of you who have read Professor Sir Hilary Beckles' book, Britain's Black Debt, will get the whole story about what went down in Durban, because he was there, our Vice-Chancellor, who is batting for social justice all around the world. The theme of our conversation includes a destiny of peace, but we know that peace requires truth-telling and justice. These historical tragedies or harms and breaches of international human rights law require a remedy. We must be bold and courageous and take on this fight against those who colonized Africa and the African diaspora, and who refuse to acknowledge their crimes and engage with us in a reparatory justice conversation. And we must do so in the name of our ancestors who suffered these terrible tragedies that I outlined. I share the sentiment so eloquently articulated by former President of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, in his speech to which I referred early. And I pause to say I thank him for having invited me and others to South Africa to talk about the Caribbean as preparation for President Aristide's stay in his country. Today, as a country, we keep an audible silence about these ancestors of the generations that live, fearful to admit the horror of a former deed, seeking to obliterate from our memories a cruel occurrence which, in its remembering, should teach us not and never to be inhuman. In conclusion, the ties that bind South Africa and Jamaica are deep and long-lasting. We are bound by historical experiences, slavery and apartheid in both countries, as well as by contemporary realities of injustice. Today, while we deepen our solidarity, let us be aware that solidarity is best expressed through cooperation. Economic cooperation and political solidarity, especially around the issue of reparatory justice, those must continue. If we truly want to make peace and prosperity our imperative, strength our destiny and destination, and rebuild those bridges broken by colonizers. We must eschew the modern chattelization of our people in the time of COVID-19 and act as if Black lives truly matter for the sake of Africa and its diaspora. May Nelson Mandela's impassioned words forever ring in our ears. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. And may we modify those words and make our own commitment and pledge. Never, never, and never again will our beautiful world continue to be scarred by racial hatred and intolerance of diversity and descend into chaos because of obduracy and intolerance. Let us join hands across the continents and oceans and build sturdier bridges of understanding as called for by CARICOM's 10-point reparatory justice program. But there can be no peace without equal rights and justice, as Peter Tosh told us, and the late Robert Nesta Bob Marley, that revolutionary icon, using the philosophy of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, that first long caution, and I just read 2 lines, unto the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. Every race war, we don't want war. A luta continua, continua, but victory is certain if we unite. Nkosi.
Professor Shepherd, thank you for an excellent presentation and a lesson in applied history. Time is of the essence, otherwise we would have extended your time at the podium. And we are proud of your international work to advance the welfare of African peoples. We now turn to an undisputed champion of reparatory justice. The Honorable Mike Henry tabled a private member's motion in the Jamaican Parliament in 2007 to pursue reparations from the former colonial governments. That has to be recorded as a hallmark of his very distinguished career of over 40 years in public service, politics, and public policy development, including various ministerial portfolios and as a member of Parliament. It's a pleasure to introduce the Honorable Mike Henry.
Honorable Olivia Grange, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. Her Excellency Lumka Yangini, as I got that correct, High Commissioner of South Africa to Jamaica. Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, QC, former Prime Minister of Jamaica. Dr. Julius Garvey, my friend, Pan-Africanist activist. Professor Vereen Shepherd, Director of Center for Reparation Research. Mrs. Lolita Davis Mattis, Attorney at Law. Moderator, Mr. Cordell Green. Courtesies having been extended, I'll pause of that and say to the wider World Web, it's my pleasure to be here this morning. Certainly it's afternoon. I noticed that they picked up early. Time is of the essence. In my lifetime is more than the essence. And in the context of that, I must say very carefully and very clearly that I'm still an older man in a hurry. But I'm not in a hurry except to see that they pay us what you owe us success being made to us for reparations. As we pay homage to Africa in this symposium on Africa Day, I preface my presentation against the background of my 50 years of my lifelong service and how much it was influenced in part by Chief Abiola and his group of eminent persons with one of our own, Dudley Thompson, and the Honorable Prime Minister, P.J. Patterson. In my book, Many Rivers to Cross, Many More Still to Cross, my presentation to Parliament was prefaced in that presentation I made by citing what Chief Abiola said in that period. He said, the question before us is whether an African slavery reparations movement should pursue legal paths or political paths. 15 years ago, I said in my parliamentary presentation that I would seek the political path to engender the legal path Thank God the day has arrived when we must confront that and make our decisions. With me asking all of us to join in this march, I do so against the background that it's 15 years ago that we passed that resolution. And here we are 15 years later, still seeming to visit the historical analysis of the reality of man's greatest inhumanity to man in slavery. So September 2007 was then I presented that presentation. And 2021, I'm here speaking now of my next presentation, because I've not abandoned the cause. I'm remain motivated by two voices I've heard in my own lifetime. I quote Marcus Mosiah Garvey, "None but ourselves can free our minds." And Bob Marley, "Old pirates, yes they rob I, so lie to the merchant ship." The practice of slavery, but more so chattel slavery, has always been rooted in political and economic considerations. So too was emancipation, and at the same time is true of the issue of reparations. Moral considerations evolving over generations of changing and social mores and political realities have given rise to the views and have strengthened the imperative for reparations. Whatever the motive, however the realities are inescapable, injury was done, relief is justified, and since injury cannot be reversed, then monetary compensation, which in time is the only true and lasting available relief that can be adjudicated. It is my view that slavery, with economic and political considerations, the British, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the Portuguese, among other imperial powers in the New World, perceived slavery. They perceived it along the lines of political and economic imperatives. Emancipation was acceded to on political lines, with economic considerations being the forefront of the discussions, certainly as evidenced by actions of the British government in the 19th century. Slave companies were formed, shares were given, and taken up by tailors, traders, ships hired and staffed, insurance companies and religious bodies, and I indict the religious bodies equally as they led the slave trading companies into the country. Time does not permit me to go into the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant approach to the King James Version of the Bible, which rewrote Kepler and Nagas out of the very Old Testament. These considerations allow for reparation for injuries from the crimes of war inflicted in the forced removal of people from their native homeland, from the human rights abuse of the Middle Passage and the plantation process which ensued, and from the wholesale abandonment of the newly freed chattel turned humans embodied in the Emancipation Proclamation and dehumanizing every aspect of their life. The stupidity of the argument, well-treated and educated slave and the beneficial heritage of an education system, a justice system, and a civil service bureaucracy, proffered by some as mitigation, must not be allowed to dignify the classing of humans as animals, which is what chattel slavery did. And the horrors of slavery must be not diluted in the demands for relief. The cane must be pressed, not just on behalf of the ghosts of the past, but on behalf of generations yet to come. The new generation of the next 200 years must be the beneficiaries of our collective actions now. Reparation must provide a lasting patrimony for generations of the future who will see that on both sides their future, unlike the past, was not impacted on individually by us or them, but was secured by we who acted collectively in the spirit of moral rectitude and political will. My research showed that we required a political decision by a parliament that we have a right to remedy for a right of this claim. That had never been a political decision by any Caribbean parliament till Jamaica in 2015. Why did I go that route? I knew that we had to look at the legal and the political. And so today I speak to my new draft petition, being brought in my name to the Judicial Committee Act of 1833. That Judicial Act will provide, and I quote from that act, to the King, "It shall be lawful for His Majesty to refer to the said Judicial Committee for hearing or consideration any such matters whatsoever as His Majesty shall think fit, and such committee shall thereupon hear or consider the same, and shall advise His Majesty thereon in the matter aforesaid. That is coming from the present body of luminaries that are working pro bono right now to prepare the petition in my name and to take it forward and ask the government and everyone else to join me in going for it now, not never. In that context, a key point of discussion during that meeting of April 14, 2021, was the formulation of the legal issues to be adjudicated. The proposed 4 legal issues to be advanced by the following. 1, whether holding people as chattel slaves under British rule was a crime against humanity. 2, whether slavery was a crime for which the government of the United Kingdom should be responsible. 3, whether the laws in Jamaica permitted slavery was unlawful, and whether there is a legal settlement or compensation. I've heard both presidents and prime ministers make their presentations. I said the time is now to make the decisions and to lead from the front. For now that the Jamaican political decision is made, it opens the door for Jamaica and the other Caribbean countries to take the matter to the International Court of Justice, to pursue reparation claims against all the countries who were involved in the slave trade for the forms of abuses as genocide, rape, murder, and the host of abused human rights under slavery. And therefore, the present legal team in my name are preparing a petition which will be taken to the Queen. In that team is, of course, the Honourable Frank Phipps, OJQC, Mr. Bert Samuels, and Mr. Ian Wilkinson. And I ask the government to join me in moving on, as Mr. Holt, and in the United Kingdom, Mr. Edward Fitzgerald QC, English Bar, and Mr. Lawrence Cartier, another legal luminary, that are preparing that draft and that petition, and I'm asked them to try and make July the target to August to have that ready. So that examination is taking place, and I cannot thank them enough for having made that kind of effort as we prepare other issues to be addressed, as we decide to awaken the people to understand that the magnitude of the claim is perhaps so audacious that we don't want to face the realities of tomorrow. It's Africa Day, however. Time is of the essence, I'm told. So the economic pundits are saying that much of the world's projected growth is predicated on the out of Africa. One can see this. I share this view. I shared it in the multimodal approach of Africa as the center of where we spin. And by that extent, they would be part of the development of the South-South trade and the future. Before I close, let me read excerpts from a recent article by the Independent newspaper entitled Britain's Colonial Shame, Slave Owners Giving Huge Payouts After Abolition. And I quote, "The true scale of Britain's involvement in the slave trade has been laid bare in documents revealing how the country's wealthiest families received the modern equivalent of billions of pounds in compensation after slavery was abolished." I pause to recognize that even the former Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, came here and shamed us in terms of what he said in our very parliament, where we have a martyred fight for slavery abolition. The previously unseen records show exactly who recorded what in payouts from the government. When slave ownership was abolished by Britain, much to the potential embarrassment of the descendants, Dr. Draper from University College, who has studied the compensation papers, says as many as 1/5 of the wealthy Victorian Britons derived all of part of their fortunes for the slave economy. Professor Vern Shepherd has done a great deal of background check on these issues, and there are numbers and monies that relate, which is not part of what I will present today. Let me just say that if the fight has just begun, and I ask for the strength to continue, to fight for the reality of what we must face, to recognize that what we inherit today is a result of in the DNA of our society and in the whole aspect of our thinking, that if we can only remove from our minds what Garvey asked us to remove, none but our minds can free ourselves. And in that context, there's much more I would have presented today. But the fight continues, and it continues currently. It continues, as I said, into August, into September. I thank Minister Grange for having allowed me the position to be here to present that. All the other documents are now fully ready, even for the financial sector of the country. I have prepared a document that relates to what the financial impact must be and how it must be. I hope it doesn't frighten us to recognize that it more than pay off all our debt. I don't think we should fail to appreciate that we could give 120 years leave of income tax to people of a sector if we wished, because immediacy of the position cries out for us to address it as soon as we can, as quickly as we can. And I say to Britain, pay us what you owe us. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mike Henry. The brief was comprehensive. The case has been made. No dissent will be broached. And that was passionate and inspirational. The next speaker has the distinction of belonging to a small group of people globally whose progenitor is a national hero. Dr. Julius Garvey is a surgeon, medical professor, and son of Jamaica's first national hero, the Right Excellent Messiah, Marcus Messiah Garvey. He continues the legacy of being a very strong voice for Pan-Africanism. Dr. Garvey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Moderator, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Minister Grange for the opportunity to be present with you here to celebrate Africa Day. And good afternoon, fellow presenters, ladies and gentlemen around the world. It is indeed a pleasure to participate in a conversation with Africa and with Africans. As we engage in this conversation about Africa's destiny, it is important that we start with an understanding of our history. As Marcus Garvey said, history is the lens through which we look at the future. We are the first people, and as Homo sapiens sapiens originated in Africa some 200,000 years ago. We have a history of settled development that goes back to around 40,000 BC, and settlement along the Nile Valley that dates to 10,000 BC, and recorded civilizations that date from 4,000 BC. All arts, sciences, engineering, architecture, agriculture, medicine, astronomy, government, and cosmology started with us as an African people and were transmitted around the world. For the last 500 years, we have been subjected to invasion, imperialism, physical slavery, and colonialism that destroyed or displaced 50 million Africans around the world. This was a process of dehumanization, destruction of our culture, denial of our history, and miseducation that destroyed our African identity and replaced it with a caricature of a human being that a doctrine of white supremacy and systematic white racism wanted us to be. This has produced the mental afflictions of self-hate, self-doubt, distrust, dependency, inferiority, and the mindset that the European is the bearer of all wisdom, the arbiter of world destiny, and that we should emulate what he says and do what he tells us to do. Carter G. Woodson in 1933 said the educational system developed in Europe and the Americas, and the resultant philosophy and ethics justified slavery, peonage, segregation, and lynching. Due to the Negro being taught the same philosophy, religion, literature, history, and economics that has established that code of morals, his mind has been brought under the control of his oppressor. Marcus Garvey in 1937 in a speech in Halifax, Nova Scotia said, "We're going to emancipate our minds from mental slavery because whilst others may free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind." We have not understood this, but have accepted physical freedom as our destination and have absorbed the materialist philosophy, scientific materialism, technological industrialization, and the capitalist economical system that Euro-America has developed, and therefore function within the parameters that our oppressors have developed. So perhaps we didn't so much win our freedom as we joined our enemy. These systems have exacerbated conflicts between people, brought the world to the brink of nuclear disaster, while depleting the non-renewable resources of the planet and creating deforestation, soil erosion, toxic waste, and pesticide buildup. We're running out of resources to feed the industrial economy. And as we create climate change, global warming, recurring recessions, we face the sixth global extinction. Clearly, what Europe has produced is a technological modernity based on the values and philosophy of scientific materialism, imperialism, and individualism. Modern education based on this philosophy has redefined knowledge as being based solely on scientifically measured facts. Only what is measurable exists or is worthwhile. 2 + 2 = 4 is a scientific fact and gives a mathematical certainty that transcends any value system. Objective values that form, therefore, the basis of virtue and character formation are dismissed as archaic ways of thought and behavior that have no place in a modern scientific and technologically advanced society. The world is thus rendered inherently meaningless. The story that's told is that it all started 15 billion years ago with a big bang. We don't know why or what preceded it, but here we are after blind chance and favorable genetic mutations, completely random without design or an intelligent designer. A conglomeration of chemical, biological, and physical processes with a lifespan of 70 in which we make do as best we can. And this modern reductionist view of the world as knowable only through facts is the basis of utilitarianism, but denies consciousness as primary and answers none of the important questions of life, its meaning, purpose, and the relationship of man to his environment. The universe is explained by facts and reason only, without any intelligent creative cause. So man is at the end of an evolutionary process that makes him supreme in nature, and the rational faculty supreme in man. This allows him to use logical scientific means for bringing natural forces under his control. Education within the system, instead of being formative, is informative. The student is trained to manipulate information. Memorization is of maximum importance, and critical independent thinking is of little value and is indeed punished. The process turns out excellent sheep with very high grades. The general population is manipulated by the same process using information technology, mass media, propaganda, robotics, and other scientific innovations controlled by the scientists, the economic power brokers, and the state. We have gone from industrial capitalism to surveillance capitalism, where our thoughts, emotions, and behavior are monitored by ubiquitous digital devices, the predictive information being bought and sold and used for behavior modification. Our humanity has been reduced. We are mere physical entities with 5 senses experiencing physical events and sensations and responding with rational intelligence based on feelings. The more and better commodities supplied by the elite, the more gratified and happier we are. In order to keep the masses from being introspective or unhappy, the elite must provide progressively more, better, and tantalizing commodities. So scientific progress and innovation is at a premium. The scientist is God, and heaven is where the money and the goodies pile up. So as we become dehumanized, nature becomes assaulted and destabilized, and we enjoy the pornification of our culture. Clearly, what Europe has produced is a modern, technologically advanced society, and the errors in the basic assumptions of the philosophy associated with scientific materialism are responsible for the individualism, greed, anxiety, confusion, fear, violence, and chaos that are its hallmarks. Matthew Arnold said, civilization is the humanizing of man within society. Most European and American nations have not achieved that because of the limitation of their basic cosmology derived from purely scientific facts, indicating a universe of stars, planets, and galaxies scattered in boundless space with no center, no goal, expanding rapidly and ultimately ending in collapse, the Big Crunch, and with human beings on a small planet circling the sun, products of blind chance and insentient nature. Africa and Africans in the diaspora, in order to survive and prosper, must discard the current Eurocentric ideologies and create a new paradigm. Fortunately, the African experience has always been a search for and a practice of what it means to be fully human. Our history is the longest in the world and the most glorious, since it gave us the origin of mankind and the basis of civilized living. Our cosmology and cosmogony has always been of one omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient source, intrinsic to all manifestation in nature, unifying us in an interconnected, integrating whole, which humans, as the highest created entity, can know in its splendor by consciousness and mind. A complete guide to human conduct and a just and moral society can be deduced from such a fundamental principle of oneness. The best of human nature, ethics, interpersonal relationships, cooperation, harmony, contentment, peace, stability, social organization, and a life ordered by the awareness of the oneness of the cosmos in its primary state of consciousness. The philosophical concept behind this was expressed in Kemet 5,000 years ago as Ma'at. Translated, this is truth, justice, harmony, order, balance, righteousness, and reciprocity. Ma'at concerns itself with the interrelatedness of all areas of reality, divine, cosmic, man, society, and the state. These dimensions must be balanced and are essentially one dimension. With this philosophy and spirituality, we can recreate African humanism as the new old paradigm needed by us and all humanity now and in the future. All African educational systems beginning in Kemet are rooted in this cosmic view of a divine creation with humans as its highest expression, made in the divine image. The purpose of education socialization process was the transformation of the human towards the full expression of his or her divine potential. Marcus Garvey said, education is the process by which a people are prepared for the creation of their own particular civilization and their own advancement and glory. It is by education that we transmit our culture. Culture is the instrument by which we deal with reality and by which we adapt ourselves to reality. One's consciousness and mind creates and conceptualizes the belief systems through which one views the world and organizes reality. Thus, culture is an instrument of power because power is our ability to define reality. If we give up our culture and allow it to be replaced by somebody else's, then we have given up our ability to define our reality and become the servants of someone else. The battle now, therefore, is for the minds of our people. To create the paradigm of African humanism, we must have an educated populace. This is the only guarantee of the personal transformation necessary for success. Steve Biko said, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Marcus Garvey said, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. African teachers must therefore understand African history, practices, spirituality, philosophy, pedagogical theories of education and socialization to create the space to facilitate the process of human transformation and a constant pursuit of perfection necessary to develop the new African. We have to create an educational system that is based squarely on the cosmology, ontology, and epistemology of Africa's agency in the world over the last 6,000 years of recorded history. Western scientific epistemologies have increasingly lost any link to the sacred and are presiding over the destruction of humanity. We cannot have human development without self-knowledge. We cannot have sustainable economic and social development without maximizing our human resources. If we do not change the current direction of going along with the Eurocentric paradigm, we too will self-destruct. The development of the human self and its perfection is essential to the establishment and maintenance of culture and civilization. We can only survive as individual societies and as a species based on a moral character and the establishment of virtue. As Russia, in order to develop its own civilization based on communism, created the Iron Curtain, China similarly to create its own civilization model of state capitalism, created the Bamboo Curtain. We too must create the Ubuntu Curtain and reshape the institutions left to us by colonization with those shaped by our own traditions. We owe it to all the millions of ancestors who have died in our freedom struggles to create our own imagined civilizational state as a guarantor of peace, harmony, prosperity, justice, and a true democracy. We must break the remaining shackles of imperialism in our negotiations with the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations, and the OECD. Marcus Garvey said, "It is only through our spirituality and science that we can combat the naked materialism of the current age." He further said, "If you desire to accomplish greatness, you must first decide in your own mind in what direction you desire to seek greatness. And when you have decided in your own mind, work incessantly towards it. Remember always, intelligence rules the world and ignorance carries the burden." I think the meaning of Ubuntu can be summed up in the motto, one God, one aim, one destiny, one love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garvey, for your powerful words and your call to action. It is always a beautiful gift to see you channeling your parents, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey and Amy Jakes Garvey. Thank you. The next speaker's reputation precedes him as a statesman extraordinaire, having had a long and distinguished political career since 1958, encompassing numerous positions of leadership, including 3 terms as Prime Minister of Jamaica. He has had a very close association with the African Union and is currently the statesman in residence at the P.J. Patterson Center for Africa Caribbean Advocacy at the University of the West Indies. Good afternoon, Most Honorable P.J. Patterson.
As we celebrate African Union Day, the P.J. Patterson Center for Africa Caribbean Advocacy is pleased to extend its warmest congratulations and express our appreciation at the invitation which has allowed our participation in the memorable exchanges on which we have embarked today. In doing so, we recall with pride our African ancestry. We readily acknowledge the common challenges for optimum development we have faced, and we reaffirm our solidarity in the search to realize our noble aspirations. I join as a member of the diaspora with others all over the world in that warm fellowship which has been nourished by our history and driven by the compelling urge to realize our rich potential for achievement through collective action. As we reflect on the past, which has been cruel and inhumane, we can confidently rely on our proven resilience to strengthen us for the battles ahead. My brothers and sisters, the past year has been entirely different from anything we have ever known. COVID-19, global warming, a spate of natural disasters, and massive migration, whether due to ethnic strife or the desperate search for a better life, have all combined in different ways to accept that the world of yesteryear is no longer fit for purpose. The desperate unpredictability as to the time and the contours of that new global system which eventually emerges impel us to mold that brand new world which future generations will inhabit on this single planet in peace. The obsolete world order, fashioned by the victors of World War II, has served the developed world admirably. Conversely, those of us who were never present at Bretton Woods due to colonial rule and oppressive regimes have found that the decks are heavily stacked against us, and we have been victims disproportionately in areas of poverty, hunger, ignorance, disease, and homelessness. We have won the combat against imperial domination and apartheid, but the scourges of exploitation and racism are still alive and flourishing. It is our prophet Peter Tosh who reminds us that while we desire peace, it must be preceded by justice. For without justice, there can be no peace. Our topic today implores us to search for peace, prosperity, strength, and unity. We need at the outset to realize that our collective strength and that complete unity which is forged in the fiery furnace must be the foundation on which we build to enjoy true and lasting prosperity. At the outset of the pandemic, our center made an unequivocal call for unity between Africa and the Caribbean, including Africa, including Cuba, in facing the COVID-19 pandemic, which has exposed us to incalculable perils. The denial to make the vaccine available to poor and medium-sized developing countries has resulted in a new form of pharmaceutical hegemony and patent imperialism. We strongly support the call of South Africa and India for the TRIPS waiver and the call by the WTO for increased production of vaccines, for equitable access to all countries on a range of medical products in order to bring COVID under full control in every continent and island. In this veil of uncertainty, the only thing we know for sure, things will never be the same again in the fields of trade, financial flows, travel, health, education, technology, and patterns of social behavior. In this unfolding scenario, Africa and the Caribbean, with the active engagement of our influential diaspora and our allies in Asia and Latin America, must insist that we are fully represented at the negotiation table. No one else can promote and protect our vital interests better than ourselves through unity which engenders collective strength and thereby protects our common interest. The new global architecture must ensure that areas where we have a vital interest cannot be simply pledges that are never honored or pious declarations which are completely and quickly forgotten. Whether it is the Durban Declaration, the Doha Round for Trade and Development, or the Paris Climate Accord. We are convinced that our umbilical connection and the acceleration of crises in our time oblige us to mobilize a trans-global condition so as to secure our rightful place and fulfill our destiny in the world of tomorrow. The PJ Patterson Center expects this timely conversation as a precursor of many more to come. the immortal spirit of Nelson Mandela demands the establishment of an institutional dialogue so that we can formulate strategies for effective intervention in our post-pandemic economic, social, and political recovery. Our global institutions and our relationships have revealed devastating structural failures. What the world needs now is a bold and modern design for this millennium, a brand new global architecture. Whatever we may achieve through governmental and collaborative institutional arrangements, the value of people-to-people contact is quintessential. Culture has always bonded the multi-identity civil society of the African diaspora. Marcus Garvey's unifying global arousal was based on a template of common culture to which people of African descent could relate and find unity of purpose. It is the cultural element that will most effectively galvanize people of African descent everywhere. This culture affinity has been consolidated through the arts, in particular, our music. In this, the genre of Jamaican reggae has been a critical unifying force. Music is entertainment which brings people together, and so too are sports exchanges. We can do much more if we can transform them into the economic engine that could drive our collective transglobal economic synergy. Let the conversation continue and be intensified so that we can breathe again and ensure that we will overcome one day, which is not too distant from today.
Thank you very much, Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, former Prime Minister, and we look forward to your continued work through the P.J. Patterson Center for Africa Caribbean Advocacy. Well, this brings us to the close of the second session on Africa Day. My name is Cordell Green, and it was a pleasure being your moderator. And may I take moderator's privilege to thank and congratulate you, the Honorable Olivia Grange, for the execution of this excellent initiative, and also Your Excellency Lumka Yengeni for being such a gracious facilitator. But the last word and the person properly to extend thanks is the chair of Jamaica's National Council on Reparation, Mrs. Lalita Davis Mattis, and it's my pleasure to hand over to her.
Mr. Cordell Green, moderator. Honorable Olivia Grange, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. Honorable Mike Henry, former Minister of Government and champion for reparation. Her Excellency, Ambassador Lumka Yengeni, the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, former Prime Minister of Jamaica and statesman in residence at the P.J. Patterson Center for Africa Caribbean Advocacy. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Chair of the Caribbean Reparations Council and Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Professor Vereen Shepherd, Director, Center for Reparation Research at the UWI. Dr. Julius Garvey, Pan-Africanist, surgeon and activist. Africans and people of African descent, all online guests, and those who will watch later, staff of the Office of the Prime Minister, staff of the Ministry of Culture, gender, entertainment and sport, the media. Today is a day well spent. Today is a day well spent for those of us who participated in today's online events. Our engagement with Africa is an engagement with ourselves. It's an engagement with our past, which collides with a future that we should consciously seek to forge together. Our future as Black people, of people of African lineage, provides opportunities for the development of a race that has suffered far too long, still exhibited in experiences like that of George Floyd. Just to name a few, one out of the many injustices meted out to Black people, many never mentioned. It's about not being afraid to associate with Africa, or with ourselves, or with the fact that our skin is darker, because it's naturally rich in melanin. It's about dispelling the images that we see about ourselves every day, about not embracing the labels that we are given or that we give to ourselves. Reparation is about the future, how the next generation navigates the global roadworks without fear because of the color of the skin. Reparation is now. Do enjoy the rest of Africa Day. Thank you.
Don't care where you come from, as long as you're a Black man, you're an African. No mind your nationality, you have got the identity of an African. If you come from Clarendon, and if you come from Portland, if you come from Westmoreland, you're an African. Don't care where you come from, as long as you're a Black man. None of mine your nationality, you've got the identity. Cause if you come from Trinidad, if you come from Nassau, I said if you come from a Cuba, yeah. Don't care where you come from, as long as you're a Black man. None of mine your nationality, you've got the identity. I said if you go to the Catholic, and if you go to the Methodist, I said if you go to Church of God, don't care where you coming from, as long as you're a Black man. None of mine your nationality, you've got the identity. I said if you come